so excited to join everyone today because it's just two people today, but not two people you might actually know. Well, you know me if you watch the show, but another person you may not know. And I'm very, very excited to bring them on because today we're going to be talking about Masters of the freaking Universe. That's right, He-Man. I'm excited. I know you're excited probably. Or if you're watching, you should be excited because it's going to be awesome. But anyway, I'm excited to talk about the history of He-Man, Masters of the Universe comic books, and I'm not alone today. No, it's not the Reverend. The Reverend couldn't make it today. He's got family stuff. I get it. Families get crazy. That's how we do it. But I am joined today by a giant MOTU Masters of the Universe He-Man fan from the awesome Legends of Greyskull Podcast, which I've been watching religiously for the last year, to discover, which I can't wait to bring on. So I'll bring them on right now. Today we've got our good friend here, Sean. Hey, Sean, sir.
Hello. Thanks for having me on, Paul.
Dude, of course. And I am super excited to have you on. Legends of Greyskull. Give us the 411 on your show and just kind of a little bit of a brief history between. Your other co-host couldn't make it today. You're sick, Matt. If you're watching this, Matt, we'll get better. We'll get you on next time, which you will read next time, I promise. So give us a little history of the Legends of Greyskull podcast. How to get started.
All right. Well, years ago, and this feels weird to say years ago now. When the Netflix had their She-Ra animated cartoon come out, and we're talking probably 4 years ago now or so when that hit. And in one of the Masters of the Universe groups on Facebook, I asked them, hey, can I draw a print of She-Ra on Swiftwind and we could give it away as just like a promotion because it's a big deal that this is the first Masters of the Universe centric anything to hit for almost 20 years at that point. And they're like, sure. So that night not that night, but I worked on this print, posted it. People were excited for this. And then they did everybody sign up by saying for the honor of Greyskull. So down my screen that night, I saw for the honor of Greyskull all the 50 to 75 times. And I'm just sitting there going, holy crap. I didn't think that many people would want this. This is amazing. And it ended up being the person who won is my co-host Matthew Deutsch on the podcast.
That is amazing.
That's how we started our friendship. I had to reach out to him, get information on how to get the print to him. And through that, we just started talking. And he mentioned, because I actually I joined another podcast before I was on Legends of Greyskull called Council of the First Ones. And because I'm on that, I'm like, well, if you want to do a podcast and you want to talk about stuff that we don't talk about there, which is mostly the news of what's going on, I'm like, if you want to deep dive into stories and stuff, that's kind of cool. And he really loved that idea because the mini comics, comic books, golden books, there's even European comics, newspaper strips. There's so much stuff out there from our childhood, and now there's more stuff coming back right now that we figured there's a wealth, plus the shows themselves. So it just became a thing. We said, let's give this a shot, and we just became these two guys who just wanted to kick back and talk about Masters for 2 hours half the time because we are verbose.
No, and that's why I love it. And I was telling you before the show, everyone, that I was watching, looking for a show to get into the Master stuff because I was getting into the Kevin Smith series hadn't come out yet, or it was on the way. I think it hadn't come out yet. Mm-hmm. And I discovered you guys. Now I just loved how genuine you guys both were, and I really respected. And just again, you guys were real. And if you guys didn't like something, you guys would say it. But you guys were, I saw a lot of myself in you because with Marvel, I'm definitely more forgiving of those kinds of things. Like I'm a Marvel zombie, right? I grew up on it. I'm going to be a little bit more easier on these things because I just love it, right? But at the same time, doesn't mean we're not going to love everything about it either, right? And I loved how you guys were critical on the Kevin Smith series, not in I can't believe it. You guys were, I like this, I didn't like this. And you talked, but you really talked through very casually, and I'd say like, oh yeah, like this did not work for me. And it wasn't like it was a full perfect series. I know I listened to you guys' show. You guys didn't love every single aspect of it. So, which I thought was great because it felt like good. Like, oh yeah, this was not perfect. It wasn't terrible. It was decent. That's what I always looked at anyway. And you guys maybe liked it more than I did, but it definitely, I felt like more kindred to what you guys were doing, and I really respected it. And yeah, so I love the show. It's great, and I was just yelling at you before. Get that season 3 for He-Man and Masters of the Universe Netflix show up there, man. I'm waiting for it. God,
it is recorded. It's in the can. I'm just waiting on Matt because he is that guy. He's the one that records it, and he's the one that also posts it. And I even myself was going, it's been like a week. We haven't posted anything, and like I said, we've had fans, and now you on top of that, and I'm like,
come on,
we got. It's like Matt, you might be sick, but how many buttons do you got to push to upload the thing? Let's do this.
Yeah, come on, man.
We have people waiting.
I'm waiting. Come on. All right. So I want to ask you. So I always forgot. It was actually the toys that made me kind of remind me was the mini comics, right? For He-Man. And so people kind of forget. And I consider myself a big He-Man fan. But like I forgot about the mini comics. Like, oh yeah, I forgot about those, those things. And so I started thinking about, wow, He-Man has way more connections to comic books than I even thought. Like I forgot about a lot of them. And there's a lot of lore that was built and not necessarily used for everything, but a lot of lore was given and a lot of TLC was put into these comic books, these mini comic books, and just through the years. And yeah, it's just crazy that He-Man has a really deep history with the comic book medium. So before we get into that, because you know way more about this than I do, probably, I'm assuming. And what's your history with comic books? Now, I meant to ask you this before we got on the show. You're an artist. You're a very good artist. I've seen your stuff.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I meant to say that before, too. And I did, I promise. But
it's okay.
What I want to ask you is, what you obviously know comics and like comics and love comics, it seems like. So what's your history with the medium and just kind of where are you at now with it? And then we'll kind of go into He-Man, piggyback from that.
All right. I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't have comics as a part of it or have any kind of a knowledge of comics. My mom, she raised me with Superman, with Fantastic Four, Justice League, Batman, Spider-Man. When I was a kid, my favorite characters were Superman and the Hulk because Superman was like that big brother I didn't have. I was an only child. And when Christopher Reeve in the movies played him, it felt like he's that guy that had your back. And, who are you? A friend. Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow, how is that not effective even in this day and age, especially with how the world is, just having this person with so much power, but wanting to just make people feel safe. I mean, that's amazing. And the Hulk was, I was a skinny little kid. The idea of turning into something where you could just become like a human battering ram, and how cool is that? So yeah, I grew up with it. My grandmother, I think my mom said, bought me my first comic, which I don't know what one it was, but she said it was a Spider-Man comic. And Spider-Man is definitely one of my favorites especially as I've gotten older. When you go through life and you realize Peter Parker's problems really aren't that far from what you go through sometimes, at least on the personal level, maybe not on the epic battle level. But yeah, I grew up reading comics from a very early age. Like the pictures and panels blew my mind. George Perez covers on Justice League. It's like I could just salivate over those all day. My mom would happily buy me Star Wars comics when Marvel was publishing those in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
And then I got into Secret War hit when I was a kid. So then that was a really cool doorway into the X-Men, because all of a sudden, here's Wolverine showing up. Well, I have a Wolverine toy from that series. What's the deal? Oh, there's this other group that I never read. What's this? Holy crap, there's a dude that turns into steel. He's freaking great. Colossus has always been one of my favorite Marvel characters ever since that point. And the fact that he's also an artist always blew my mind. And when I was a kid, I always had comics, but then, I'd have times where I'd trail off. Like there'd be times I go to the bookstore and I'd pick up like a few Daredevil issues, the Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. run. Like that one cover of him with the noose on the cover was so effective. My mom was like, I don't know if you should get this. I'm like, that's awesome. Are you kidding? Like, that just looks so imposing. And The Man Without Fear, Frank Miller, written with John Romita Jr. again. And then I'd be on and off. And then what really hit was I think it's issue 279 of Uncanny X-Men, Colossus on the cover, because he had been gone from the team for quite a while, and there he is about to punch Professor X right in the head while he also is holding him strangling him.
Dude, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's like he looks gold because there's fire and stuff, even though he's not Shadow typically King. Gold. Yeah, the Shadow King, the whole Muir Island saga. That one. I was like, I got to get that issue. That's my boy. I got to see, why is he going to punch Professor X? What the heck? Like that was, it was a perfect time in comics to have covers like that for me and have me go, what? And I need to get it. So I started reading it from there. I had to get the next issue. And then in the next issue, it had the X-Men #1 ad. And I'm like, well, what's that all about? They're doing a #1. And I thought that they were killing off Uncanny to just go to an X-Men book. And I thought, well, this is the perfect time for me to get on board there. And then I started learning, oh, there's this dude. His name's Jim Lee. He's like one of the people that you're going to be inspired by for 20 plus years. And it went from there. I was a big X-Men fan. I got into Image, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Will Spertasio, Mark Silvestri, all of those big names that went to Image. I was buying some of their stuff. And then I trailed off again when I got into like late high school and art school, but then I came back into it with Spider-Man. When the Spider-Man movie hit, I ended up getting into the J. Michael Straczynski run with, and I was actually listening to that episode earlier this evening, and I really enjoyed hearing you guys talking about that, because that brought back some memories from 20 plus years ago with that whole run, and the Moreland character making my blood run cold, going, this guy, I'm legitimately freaked out when he's on the page. And I don't know many villains that have done that in comics to me. That was awesome. So
no, totally. So do you buy comics regularly now besides MOTU?
No, and actually the MOTU ones I don't really buy as regularly either. And part of it is a lot of the corporates, like the DC and Marvel stuff, kind of lost me after I had 2 kids. Once I had my second child, it just all went out the window for me. I got into the New 52 at the ground level when that all hit, and I was really like, I'm one of those people where I even like on a show I like, it's hard for me to keep going with a show, because after a certain point, I'm like, I already kind of know what they'll do, because there's a, verse, chorus, verse kind of vibe to that.
Yeah, exactly. And right.
New 52 or X-Men #1 or some of this stuff is like, it's my happy spot, because it'll really throw that status quo up in the air. And then you'll have like some crazy stuff happening. Like I always liked with X-Men, for instance, they'd always have these like crazy mix-up teams that you would go, well, why did they put these people together? And then when you read the book, you're like, damn, now I care about Havoc. This is great. I didn't even think I liked Havoc until today. I've always loved Havoc. Come on now. No, I have too. I'm just saying that's like, he's the lesser Summers Brothers to a lot of people. Right. And I'm usually the one going, I like him over Scott any day, because Scott can be a dick half the time. So
you're not wrong.
And I had a buddy who's like, well, you gotta have somebody who's a Boy Scout. I go, that's what Superman's for, and he doesn't feel like a Boy Scout like Scott does to me. But yeah, so Havoc was always more interesting to me in that way.
Yeah. Plus, his costume was amazing.
Yeah,
I think his black costume was, I think, is one of the most unconventional, weird, just Neil Adams weirdo.
Agreed. Absolutely
awesome stuff. Well, I'm hoping maybe with our new found friendship, I can maybe get you reading more comics in general these days, and get you because that's something why the binge exists, actually, Sean. The binge, the other reason, but one of the other reasons is to actually get to create a place for people to get in like ground level, no matter what we're doing. Like right now we're doing the Infinite Crisis binge, and we started at one point, and you can use it just as a stepping point. Like, where do I go? We have a show. You just, we talk about it. You can go back and read it, and then we'll watch the show, and then go back and forth and go along with us. And I want to create a place where people can, if they want to find about comic books, they can learn about it, one, but also have people that can kind of like, if they have people, but like relate to people and say, yeah, I like that. Or, you know, or this Paul guy's full of SH, you know, I don't know, I mean, whatever. Which is cool. I love people disagreeing with me. So I want to get people into comic books. The medium's too good for us not to read comics, which I know you do read comics. So,
no, I agree. And actually, just binging through your channel in the last week, because honestly, when you reached out to us, I was like, that's awesome, you have a channel. And then Matt was like, I've seen some of his videos. I'm like, I gotta see some of his videos. I jumped on.
Matt, you're awesome, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, he was excited for that. So yeah, again, hope you get well, Matt. You got to come on here. This is great. Paul's a good guy. But I was listening to the Man of Steel, John Byrne video the other day, and I'm like, man, it was so refreshing to hear people talking about Superman and not ragging on Superman for being who he is. And you guys genuinely had that, like, well, that's what makes him great. That feeling that, you know, it's like he's human, even though he's not of Earth. He's from here. He's that guy.
Yeah.
And how that last page of Man of Steel, with that being the final word and all that stuff. And for me, like Birthright's another one where I get
we're gonna do Birthright, yeah.
Anybody who I talk to, if they don't like Superman, I'm like, give that one a shot. I'm like, I know Man of Steel is there, but that's of its time. I'm like, Birthright is the one that I honestly cry every time I get to the last page of that book, because when you get to that final page and it circles around the way the storytelling does, and you see that, and it just, like, as a parent, I'm actually getting chills right now remembering it, because it's like, how amazing of a underpinning emotionally is that in that story, that it gets to come back to that moment again. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who doesn't read it, but I'm just saying it's
been a while.
Wow.
I got into Birthright. I got really into Smallville in 2005. And I was binging a bunch of Superman books. I remember buying like Secret Identity. I bought in all seasons, and then I picked up Birthright, kind of out of, because Mark Waid, because I know Mark Waid from before. I'm like, oh yeah, Mark Waid's a good writer. I had no idea who Lineal U was, or I'm probably butchering his name, but holy crap, that guy's artwork's incredible. I love his stuff. No, we're gonna do Birthright eventually, and you probably don't know, but my co-host, one of my best friends, Chris, on the show, he is one of the biggest Superman fans I've ever met, and he loves Superman. So we'll get you on Superman shows when we do Birthright. We'll get you on.
I'd be happy to. Love that one.
You guys are coming on again. You guys are coming on again. I mean, you too, Matt. And Chris, thank you for being on the show. If you guys are on watching the show, hit the like button, please. I hate asking it. I hate to hit like button. Just engage the like button, please, so I can get into the algorithm. Engage with it, please. I hate saying all the tropes of stupid, you know, hit the like button. I hate that.
Smash that like button. Subscribe. Ring that bell. Yeah, I know.
Subscribe, please. I hate it.
My kids watch YouTube videos of like the kid videos and all that stuff, and now I can hear them walk around the house. Hit the subscribe button, everybody. I'm like, oh my god, you guys are this already. This is horrible.
No, stop it, please. So, which hopefully, hopefully maybe through the binge we can get you reading some more stuff or whatever. And if you haven't already, digital comics is like the best replacement for. I know some people. I posted a video the other day. My friend Pete, or I don't want to reveal his real name. Someone wrote, he doesn't like downloading comic books, and I said, he put in, he downloaded something else, not Superman comic books, and I said, all right. And I was shocked at what he said. So we'll put the video on there. If you know the person, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, but yeah, digital comics. If you haven't, I'm not sure if you're a digital guy or not. Okay.
I have some. Basically, what I did with that was I wanted to have the ones that I loved digitally so that I don't have to take them if I'm on a road trip or something. So there's a bunch that I have on there. Also, I should have probably, like, I don't have it open or whatever, but it'd be like, here's a list of all the ones. But there's a lot of Superman in there, and Avengers, Cap, all sorts of stuff. So
right on, man, right on. So I know you love He-Man, and so I'm going to ask you. We're going to talk about this. It's He-Man's connection with comic books, and I don't know if it starts with comic books or not. But where does your He-Man love start exactly?
My He-Man love started when I was at the Five and Dime in Baltimore, and my mom had me in the toy aisle, and there was this figure on the pegs, and I just looked at him, and I was already into Superman, and the big muscular guys usually were like, oh, how cool is that to play with these things? And I'm like, I don't know who this is, but he looks like he could take care of business. I need this. And I'm like, I'm 3 going on 4 because this year's the 40th anniversary already. And I'm like begging my mom. I'm begging her, like, please let me have this figure. As she looks, as she sees there's a battle axe, a shield, and a sword. And she's like, no. I'm like, why can't I have him? Like he reminded me of a Hulk, but he looked human and all this stuff. And she's like, I don't want you to have the battle axe and the sword. It makes you fit. It's violent. It's going to make you want to hurt people. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I just want to have the guy. I don't care about the weapons. This guy looks really cool and all this stuff. And I'm like,
true.
There's a comic in here. What's going on with that? Because you could see it in the back. And I'm just like, come on. And I wore her down, and I left with that figure. And then through that, I discovered the mini comics involved, and that was pretty much my entry into the Masters of the Universe. From that point on, He-Man as a figure, the mini comics, boom.
Wow.
Hand in hand.
So the mini comics were your first gateway into the Masters of the Universe. And so, because I remember, I think watching an episode of your podcast, you had talked about how the Filmation show was kind of like, oh my God, they're making it. Is that right? You found out like they're making a show of this? Like, what the heck?
Basically, the toys premiered, or the toys were on the shelves a year before the cartoon, around that point. And when I don't know why, I feel like that year was a lot longer looking back at it, because there was a lot of stuff thrown at me with Masters, and I was eating this stuff up. I got all the figures of the original 8 wave that initially were released. I had all the mini comics, so I was looking through those. I couldn't read them, but my mom would read them to me, and I'd keep looking back at the images. And DC Comics had a mini series as well. At that point, they did a 3-issue series. Plus, they had the Superman meets He-Man. Superman ends up on Eternia and has to fight He-Man because he's controlled by Skeletor. So the typical comic trope of here's the 2 heroes duking it out, like in Avengers and everything.
I love it.
Exactly. So I know I didn't get that issue, and I had the last. I want to say I had the first and the second issue of the miniseries. I didn't get the third as a kid. So I had that, and then there was Golden Books that were out, and there was a record and all sorts of stuff. They had all this promotional stuff coming out for this line, and I was really invested in this stuff from like the beginning of it, because the thing about He-Man for me was, if you look at the box art itself looked like Frank Frazetta paintings. They were done by Rudy Obrero, but they looked like he was channeling Frazetta to make this toy line. And when I was a kid, there was nothing like that on the shelves. There was either superheroes or, like I was probably 3-4 years old. So, I was still into some Fisher Price, I'm sure, or whatever. Migos.
Hey, Sean, this is the artist you're referring to, the Frank Frazetta guy?
No, that is actually Alfredo Alcala. And he's the one
right, but he was channeling.
He was channeling that, but then if you look at the paintings, like the Battle Cat box art, the original Castle Greyskull box art, that might come into your head a little bit more. That was his name was Rudy Obrero, and he was real he made Eternia look like this dark, war-torn place. And what I love is, as a kid, that made so much imagination come out of me of what the deal was. And then when you knew Skeletor, Beastman, Merman, it's like there are these things that come out of the darkness and want to hurt people. and this, it's this war-torn, desolate land, and I'm imagining me as a 4-year-old on that land of Eternia, these things coming out of the darkness at me, and all of a sudden here comes this big blonde barbarian with an axe and a sword and a shield, and he'd do like basically like we talked about before with Christopher Reeve, it's instead of "I'm a friend," it's "I've got you, run," and he just goes head first into these enemies, and I'm just there going, okay, and that's part
I'm
of
here for it.
Exactly. He's like, "I got this, kid," and he just goes right into battle. And there was something so it was just elemental about the concept of that, and it just felt dangerous. It felt mysterious, and it felt just it was barbaric, basically. Like everything that the cartoon became, it was opposite of what I pictured this brand being. And so when the cartoon came out, which I was excited, I was so excited. I'm thinking to myself, wow, they could maybe make each episode keep moving into the next, like the mini comics would sometimes they'll introduce Ram Man, for instance, and then we can meet Manny Faces, or thinking about how this would work. And the whole idea of, at that point, it was like a capture the flag. It was He-Man and Skeletor would be fighting each other to get into Greyskull, and whoever got into Greyskull had the power of the universe. That's pretty much the storyline. It was like capture the flag, for lack of a better term. And instead, the cartoon came on, and I still remember I'm sitting there just like, okay, I'm watching this. I'm so excited. And then all of a sudden, it's like, who the hell's Prince Adam? Like, I knew he was in the comics. He was in, like, DC started creating some of this to help flesh out the mythology back then. So they, in some of the comics, and even in the record that was put out, they had this big LP record with He-Man knocking the power sword out of Skeletor's hand with his battle axe. And I had that when I was a kid.
This is one of the records right here.
That was the Point Dread one, which that one I absolutely loved, and I think I probably just wore that book out when I was a kid because I loved the artwork in it. But yeah, so I'm thinking it's going to be a little more dark, and then all of a sudden the show starts. There's Prince Adam, and he's wearing pink, and I'm like, well, it's the 80s. Okay. Like, I wasn't really upset, but I'm just like,
you're thinking, this is the 80s. We're good.
It's
good.
The 80s. Men wear pink. It didn't really faze me too much, but I was like, well, that's kind of, of the now, but okay. And this is me at 4 analyzing this.
Yeah, I know. You've got this down, Sean. Like, you actually, wait, no wonder you're an artist. No wonder you got this, right? God.
But it was so, like, basically what won me over on the show was anytime Adam got into the pose and you'd hear the music kick in, and by the power of Greyskull, that every time just hook, line, and sinker, I'd be stuck to that TV. But then when they showed Orko, I literally was sitting there, and I just was like, what the hell is that? And I didn't say it like that as a 4-year-old, but I'm just sitting there going, that is not anything I know of. Who is this thing? Like, what is that? And
the commercialism.
I didn't see. That's the thing. The show, for as much as I know that people love the show, I felt like the show really did play down a lot of the aspects I wanted to see play up, which was, I'd like to see ferocious villains. I wanted to see something that made me a little afraid. So when He-Man jumped in, it was going to be like, you're cheering, it's like I wanted it to be a lot like every episode should be like when Cap says Avengers Assemble in Endgame. Like, I wanted that every day, just cheering and pumping my fists at the TV. So, and it ended up being a little more age appropriate, but it still worked for people, and it definitely brought a lot of people into this, and it became the phenomenon that it is. So I can't really complain.
Well, and one of the things I think that when I was a kid, I grew up watching it. My dad, he loved fantasy stuff, and so he'd always watch Star Wars, so my growing up, it was Secret Wars. We brought Secret Wars, Star Wars, And He-Man and Ghostbusters are pretty much right after that. Like, you know, and I watched it all the time religiously.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a bunch of the toys. I mean, I had so many He-Man toys. It was crazy. but again, like, I remember I probably looked at the comics, but didn't realize what exactly they were.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't read, right? I just look at the pictures. So
sure.
I didn't even think about the mini comic aspect. But it's interesting because one of the things that I always have to remember is back in the day was there were so many regulations on for kids TV
mm-hmm.
that you couldn't do like violent stuff, even if they wanted to be a little more adult, or not adult, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, a little bit darker or whatever. If they were syndicated, they had to play up to the parents who were like, why are this people learning, you know, all this stuff. So that was the reason why you couldn't have the more like a little bit grittier these comic books. But what I find interesting was watching the Toys That Made Us and how they basically said that the comics were an afterthought. Like,
mm-hmm.
how we sell this line, you know. And one of the things I thought was interesting in it was that they said, well, it's a comic book, but what if the kids can't read?
That's true.
But it's so ridiculous though, because here's the thing though, people, is that this is the beauty of the medium of comic books, is that the words are only an extension of the story. They're not the story. It's not like you're trying to read a book or a novel. The pictures tell the story. And if the artist is doing their job, and Sean, you know probably better than anyone, if the artist is doing their job, they don't need words. You just have the pictures. And as someone who grew up reading comic books, and I say reading, I didn't read. I only looked at the pictures. And it took me a long time to get to read because I hated reading because of many different reasons. I didn't have, I guess I maybe had trouble reading, but it was more just like, I had really bad ADHD and I had trouble focusing. That was my main problem. And so reading like words, like just doesn't process. The pictures always engaged me. I could follow along. And, you know, I always tell a story, and people probably are sick of me of talking about it. This is the whole like 3 people actually religiously watch. Chris, I love you, by the way, who's watching. But one of the things that I always say is that The Dark Knight Returns is one of my first comics I ever, you know, reading. And when I say read, Frank Miller did not have to write anything. He did a beautiful job of doing the pictures, and I loved everything about it, even the weird nuance stuff with the televisions and everything. I knew exactly what he was going for subconsciously, and I loved it, even as a kid. So, you know, it's one of those things where the comic medium, you don't really need to have words, which I'm really glad that they didn't worry about that. And they went, yeah, just, you know, we just put a comic out, whatever. And that helped, because they also went with the whole idea of like, let's encourage kids to read, you know, and I think that's what they went with, right? Basically,
yeah.
They sold the
I honestly, what I loved about the line, especially, and looking back, the original 4 mini comics that came out with the initial wave of the first wave of the figures were more like storybooks than comic books. It was one illustration per page. There was maybe a paragraph underneath it. You could get your mom and dad to sit and read it to you if you want. It was in this era, the He-Man and the Power Sword and things like that, where you'd have the Alfredo Alcala artwork, which is a huge reason why so many people to this day who would rather see the barbarian version of Masters versus the superhero version, for lack of a better term, the way Filmation did it, they wanted to see this because that art is a huge part of what made that resonate to them. When you look at these, the way that Alcala did the figures and the anatomy and stuff, he was making it feel like this action figure came to life and I'm just drawing what I've seen him doing while you're asleep. It's like Toy Story or something. Right. He had such a amazing grasp of anatomy, but also just in general, he always had this feeling to his pencils, almost like he's seeing Eternia and he's letting you see what he got to see through his pencil and pen and all that. And it immersed me so much into this world as a kid and these characters without even reading words other than He-Man, Man at Arms on their labels,
right, on
their
boxes. Cards. Yeah.
So again, you know, like this is one of the first lines that ever attempted this, and that's
Right.
one of the things I took away from the Toys That Made Us, and I really didn't think of that up until that point. Like, they were trying to figure out, well, how do we fight against Star Wars? How do we get something that is going to make the boys get excited to pick these toys up instead of always just going to Star Wars and Kenner's going to rule the world one day or whatever, and then they came up with that little idea of the mini comics, and the way they did it in that first run was perfect, because if you didn't read, you still got this amazing art, and the art told the story with one page of art versus multiple panels, and needing to go through all the stuff like they do in the next wave when Mark Tigzero took it over. Then it became a comic book, but this was more like your traditional, here's like a golden book storybook in a mini comic form with beautiful art.
It's beautiful. The art was beautiful, but here's the thing: I did not like because I reread those comic books for people. I got the omnibus, and it's worth picking up. It's not even that expensive. Dark Horse does a pretty good job of these omnibuses. They've always had, even when they had the Star Wars license before, those really cheap omnibuses. I loved them, and look how thick this thing is. The thing is huge, and it's really well done. I am always so impressed. And again, they give us pretty cheap. It's not like super expensive either. It's not like $10, but it's not that far off either. But what's crazy is that I'm a purist. I like the artwork, but the storybook format just didn't feel right. Even then, not then, but even now as I read it, I'm like, it doesn't feel right. Like, for the characters, not just the story, but just the way they're being brought out. But it's Mark Teixeira, which I love Mark Teixeira. I've always have. Like, if you don't know who he is, all I gotta say is, go to Ghost Riders 90s series of Danny Ketch, written by Howard Mackey. That stuff is incredible. Like, people, Mark Teixeira is, and obviously his Black Panther run with Christopher Priest too, back in the early 2000s, also a very famous run. The dude's incredible artist. But listen, that is to me his best stuff. It's crazy. I almost feel it's underrated. That Ghost Rider run is so underrated. The artwork is so good.
Absolutely.
But reading these comic books, I'm like, Mark Teixeira? Hell yeah, dude. Yeah. And dude, like, as I'm reading these comics, preparing for the show, because I'm a good host like that, have to do what I have to do, right? Right, Sean? But but dude, this stuff is like Mark Teixeira. Like, I'm sorry, like the guy could storyboard like a mofo, and this stuff is so good, and this is so energetic, and it's so simple. And that's the one thing about comic books I love so much, is that there is a simplicity that Mark Teixeira really gets into, and he uses. It's basically, they don't use more than, like, I think 4 panels. Every once in a while they might have 5, but it's mainly like 3, 4. That's it, or 2. And I just love the work of this, and to me, I felt like the stories really came alive with the comic format more than the golden book format that he used early on in the mini comics, if you will. Curious, where did you prefer the storybook format, or do you prefer the traditional comic book format?
I like both.
For this,
I'd say, like, I think it worked well the way that they did it, because Alcala's stuff worked well for that. Here's one image, and you could just pour over that image. But then when you got into these, which each of the issues, I want to say, each of the mini comics that I always called him Tigzero, but Teixeira. I'll try to. I'll fumble my way through.
I'm terrible. I'm terrible at pronouncing. Don't take my pronunciation, please. By all means.
Well,
please,
I've always said Tigzero from when I was from the '90s, because when I found the Ghost Rider stuff, I was just like, that guy knows how to do some amazing stuff. Just no way around it. And even without inks, I would just love to see his stuff just penciled. I think it did kick it up a notch with what they did here, because I love these as well, because of the fact that they introduced different characters that were being added to the line through him doing the art. So in one issue, he's covering, here's Trapjaw. Well, who is Trapjaw? Here you go. This is Trapjaw. And honestly, that's one of those appearances that still fans are like, well, that's not Trapjaw because he's green and, you know, he's not blue like a Trapjaw. And it's like these things where it's like, no, but I like the fact that that's something that I enjoy about Masters. They were so wanting to put stuff out and keep the line going and keep the momentum going that they were in the production process on some of these characters. They saw Trapjaw with the greenish yellow skin like's on the screen here. And they're like, well, that might have been a concept, but then the toy looked different. And then that's always been like a grail for fans through the years of, oh, I wish they'd make that version too, because I like the mini comic or whatever. And then there's a mini comic Ram Man, and then there's Manny Faces and stuff. And I mean, there's not really a bad one of the bunch of any of the issues that he worked on. I mean, right here too, he did the cover to that. And I mean, it's like, that's an iconic cover. Just, you know, the He-Man, although it is funny, he's got his shield raised. Teal is taking the brunt of the hit, but He-Man's like,
I know, he's like, oh, yeah. He's like,
better you than me.
Yeah. Everyone for themselves, even women. I don't care. Everyone for themselves. Only the survival of the fittest. You know, it's fascinating that because these comics, as you guys can see, everyone, look how thick this went on forever. Like when I say forever, as long as the toy line went on, they kept doing mini comics, right?
Yes.
Like that
for the originals,
but even like I know they have later comics. They have the She-Ra comics in here too. We've got I think isn't also the He-Man in Space one in there too? I think, is that right?
Yeah, they only did a couple of mini comics on that one, and we did actually read those on Legends of Greyskull, and it shocked me how those are actually pretty good. Like, I know the cartoon is one of those things that you love it or you hate it, and that's about the end of it if you're in a Masters fandom. But the mini comic actually did some pretty cool stuff. There's a moment in it where maybe I shouldn't spoil it, but there's
I'll read it eventually. Don't spoil it. No spoilers.
There is a moment where something is revealed, and the way it's done is done so well, and especially with where the storyline was at that point, that even I now in my 40s reading that, I was like, that's awesome. Like, if I was a kid, I would have just like leapt in the air and been like, oh my God. Yeah. So I need to finish. I will finish this one day. And one day. Yeah, I understand.
You get it. You get it. No, I never saw the New Adventures of He-Man. I always meant to. I remember being like a kid being like, this looks weird. I just didn't like it, you know. I mean, it just did not feel like He-Man. So they definitely lost me on that one, unfortunately. But again, I felt like it was diet He-Man. That's what it felt like to me. It didn't feel like He-Man. It was diet He-Man.
The thing about it, like, I didn't even I think I knew the toys were out, but I never saw the cartoon as a kid. Never ever. It didn't even cross my mind, and we had moved, so I could only get in certain stations. So some of the cartoons I missed out on growing up. But
we had
the thing is, well, I mean, we had four
stations, serious,
you know, and all that stuff.
Yeah,
so it was that
cable TV wasn't always easy to get, even if you could afford it, right? It was like, because if you're in a rural place, you're screwed.
Exactly.
You know.
But the thing about it, that from a certain perspective though, is you had after He-Man, then all of a sudden the rollout of everything else from the 80s hit. So you had you know, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Voltron, Silverhawks, and the onslaught just continued, and my parents' wallets got thinner and thinner because I needed all these toys and comics and whatever. And
I still need all those toys and comics.
And the thing is, though, when you watch Filmation He-Man, it doesn't have the kineticness of watching the intro to Thundercats, for instance. Thundercats, that thing was like when I first saw that as a kid, I needed a cigarette when that was over. Like I was like, that is amazing. So
wow. Sean, I like you guys. I knew we'd be vibing. I like your style. I thought you would know that. I knew when I watched your show, I'm like, I know me and those guys. We'd have a good time. We'd have a good time. I get it.
It like watching that, like that one little moment of Cheetar run, and not just because it's Cheetar, but the Cheetar running through all the mutants blew my mind as a kid.
Right.
Because I'm just I'm looking at how they animated that. That's nuts. And then when you go back and you watch He-Man, and he goes almost every episode, and it's like, for them to go, okay, let's try to do more anime inspired and let's go that route. I'm like, well, that makes sense. But the thing with that one, at least, was if they brought in a little more of the elements that most people were used to in Masters, because basically in that cartoon they had Adam and He-Man, obviously, and then they had his mother and father, and then Teela showed up eventually, but everything else was so brand new other than Skeletor. So for kids who grew up with Filmation and Castle Greyskull, the Power Sword, and it's like, it's so alien. I see why it didn't work. It was so far removed that it just didn't click for the people who grew up with it, and the newer people were already onto like Ninja Turtles and things like that. So,
and it's interesting because I just looking through it, you talk about the reason Legends of Greyskull exists because you love the lore of what Masters has brought.
Sure.
And I have to remember, and this is why I want to go read and watch the show eventually, is that that show addresses the space element of Eternia, and the franchise or universe, or whatever you want to call it, kind of addresses that whole idea, right? Like, I mean, like, we're in space, and then what's outside of Eternia? Because Eternia is not, a universe; it's a planet. So
it basically, and I don't know the show even remotely like Filmation or 2000X or any of the newer stuff, so I could be completely wrong. But basically, from what I remember, the premise is He-Man is needed in the future. So they take him from Eternia and they bring him to the future to become a champion, and then Skeletor's in the future, and then it's the whole, okay, and the typical age-old battle is still around and all that stuff. And I think for a lot of people, the minute you take away Eternia, the minute you take away Castle Grayskull and some of those key things in the mythology, and you convert them into something else, it's going to make it harder for people who think those are important to get excited about this when you're changing it up so drastically. And again, like I only saw maybe like 1 or 2 episodes of the cartoon. I read the mini comics and stuff, but it's never been one that I've been drawn to. It's usually one that I am like, I know it's there. It's not my cup of tea. I'm sure there are people out there. I did see one of your viewers actually said that was liked Chris, it. That's cool. I have no problem. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong. And I think it's great. Every version of this has a fan for a reason. And, there's nothing wrong with that. And they're still honoring that even today. They're not just pushing that under the rug and saying it never happened and stuff. Right.
So the DC comics came out. They were just basically trying to tie the mini comics and the show together at all?
I see, that's the thing. In the timeline, I feel like it was a way of trying to legitimize the idea. It was almost like, we're trying to sell the concept, put it out there, get more people interested in it. And it was trying to flesh out ideas a little bit more, because the DC comics were where the initial, there is a Prince Adam, and then he has to go in this series, he goes into a cave of power, and he transforms through going into this cave, and then he comes out as He-Man and Battle Cat, and it almost has like a Batman feel to it, where Batman, Bruce Wayne goes to the Bat Cave, he comes, boom, Batmobile flying out into Gotham, and I feel like Mattel was looking for a way to make the story more cohesive, to make it have more longevity. So they had the Golden Books telling one story, Records telling one story, and then these comics telling one story, and it was kind of like an up for grabs of let's see which one is the one people gravitate to the most. And at the same time, the Filmation show is being produced, so then there's elements of this that they added to the Filmation show. So like this does not have By the Power of Greyskull, for instance. This is just he goes into the cave, the sorceress is in there, she gives him the garments, and he comes out as He-Man, and he's ready to go.
The force field.
Yeah,
Which I didn't know. I didn't know that was a force field.
Yeah,
I had no idea. So, like, I read those mini comics. I'm like, what the hell is a force field?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. He had the force, and then the other one was to augment his strength. So he had two harnesses, both looking identical. You didn't know which one was which, but one way or the other, he could have something that protected him if he was prepared. It was like he was like Batman before Batman became the Deus Ex Machina character that he became in the 90s. And
shark repellent I brought with me. Sure
exactly. He's got to have. I would love He-Man to have Eternian shark repellent. That would be amazing. Or Eternian skeleton repellent for Skeletor.
Yeah, I'd be all about that. So, but good. Sorry.
No, I just I know this was definitely the beginning of the Atom dual identity and the DC. That was like their he's this powerful character. Well, let's turn him into like a Superman character, and then that helped Filmation broaden it more into what I consider a superhero show than a barbarian kind of a feel, like Thundar or something, for instance.
Right. And so I always forgot that DC had it. And then I remember, even as a kid, going through like comic stores and most, not even comic stores, mostly like 7-Elevens, gas stations, I would see these comics like on the reg, and I had this comic book. I actually read it the other day, and I was amazed when I looked through it. I'm like, man, like Hordak is like the main, like, he's like the main character, which is obviously strange because he was a She-Ra villain. But was this where they first brought Hordak with Skeletor, or was that like the special?
Actually, like for me, it was like Hordak and the Horde were always something that I equated to He-Man until Filmation did The Secret of the Sword, and then all of a sudden now we're dealing with the Horde. And there's Adora and She-Ra and everything. This stuff was happening before that happened. At least not this comic, but that storyline was happening probably, a year to months at least before that movie hit. So I looked at it as it was just this rival third faction within the Masters universe they were coming up with, which I thought was awesome because suddenly... just suddenly you have He-Man, and then there's a force now that makes Skeletor go, He-Man, I think we should team up now. And suddenly you have the Evil Warriors and He-Man both going, this isn't good. We got to fight these guys off. And for me as a kid, that was mind-blowing because I've never seen that happen before with a story like that.
Well, I wanted to ask you, so where did Hordak first appear? Was it through the mini comics?
As far as I know, it was the toys, and these mini comics. They had one introducing each Horde member, as far as I remember, and then also like I remember, even the commercials of the time, they almost did like the Marvel stingers at the end of their commercials. They would have a commercial that would introduce a new figure. And at the end of the commercial, there would be a quick little 10 seconds, and they're like, and coming this fall, the Horde. And then they bust through a wall, and you're like, what is this? And you'd be like, primed for this. And then the mini comics, the He-Man magazine at the time, they would be playing this stuff up. And then when the Horde came out, it was a big deal because there's this another faction for He-Man. So then when it became She-Ra, it was like, oh, that's not what I thought it was going to be.
Right. And so as many comics go through, and obviously the franchise kind of dies down a lot, and we go to 2000X, and they tried really hard to bring He-Man back. I read some of these comics, whatever. I went on there and tried to, check them out, and kind of I had a couple of them. I love that comic. I love the cover, and everything. But yeah, I don't know. Like I know Val Staples is kind of no pun intended, is a staple of the MOTU. I'm familiar who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised that, they had Val write this. I had no idea. It wasn't bad. It was fine. There's fine comics. You've told me, I think you said that you love the art. The art is very good. I would say that.
Emiliano Santalucia was one of the main artists on that book. They traded off art chores sometimes. I cannot for the life of me remember. I think it was Enzo, the other artist. I could be completely wrong, and I feel bad about that. But Emiliano was a huge part of why I wanted to get that book, because it was beautiful. And the amount of detail in every single page, and it never looked like he rushed anything. It all looked from beginning to end so consistent, and the line work was so beautiful that I ate it up for that reason. But the stories, like the stories kept progressing as like, okay, the next issue we're gonna do this. And it was a little different than even like Filmation or the Star Comics, where it was a one-off, and then the next issue would be something completely different. So it was like the slow burn that we've become used to, the decompression kind of storytelling at that era.
It's not, but it wasn't. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't very engaging. It felt like very much like 2000X.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It was like it's just not. It's like it felt like 2000X, but not trying to enhance like the mythology. And it was just kind of like, hey, you'll like this because it's the same thing. I'm not trying to
no
Val or anything. But the art is incredible. The art is very very image 90s.
Oh yeah,
in a good way. I mean, this is this beautiful.
That's I want to say, is that Brett Booth that did that one? Oh no. That's Jim Mafu.
Incredible.
I want to say his name, but I don't want to say it wrong. But yeah, I've seen his stuff in other places. They even got for one of the covers they had Drew Struzan even. J. Scott Campbell was the one I wanted the most of, because that was awesome.
I had that cover.
Same here. But then they had like Drew Struzan. They got I think Boris Earl Norm, who he did a lot of the original Masters paintings. They brought him back for one of the issue covers and stuff too. They did a lot of variant covers, which again, product of the time. Variant covers as of the 90s was the thing for like well over a decade, and Masters definitely did that as well under Image.
So we're going to the current times, because they've dialed back a little bit, except for Dark Horse. There's been a little bit of comic books here and there, which by the way, I'm bummed we haven't gotten like new comics of this series, because this is what I want. I want comics of this stuff, man.
I agree.
By the way, if you're wondering why I have this figure, you can blame this guy, because it's on his show that he brought this out. I went, I have to have that. I have to get it, because I'm telling you, these jumbo figures are incredible.
This was the one that made me have to get that, because this Battle Cat was freaking awesome, and the design is nutty, but when you see it as a figure, it's like so freaking great, and plus the show makes it great. He's my favorite character on the entire show.
He's great. He's a departure, but I like it. But so going to the modern comics, I went to get ready for the He-Man show for Kevin Smith show that came out first. Mm-hmm. I read a ton. In fact, I read not just a ton. I read all the DC stuff minus Not Injustice. I'm not reading that crap. Sorry, no offense, people who like that. Not reading I will eventually read maybe the DC versus the Masters of the Universe. I don't know if I'll ever get that far.
Okay.
But I did read majority of, I think, the whole relaunch that happened in like 2008. I read all those comic books. And it's mixed results. I did not like Eternity War. I liked what they did with She-Ra's character, because I know they legally can't. I love that character. What was her name? The Hordak. Oh God, that was great. The Spar was great.
Yeah.
That's something they could do for a movie or something in the future.
Agreed.
I loved all that. That was good stuff. It wasn't consistent. I didn't like Tila turning into a green sorceress. That was weird. Just gonna say it right now. That was strange. And I made you read a comic book, because when I was doing my big reread, and I read the 3 origin series. Before I get to the one I want you to talk about, I'll talk about this. I reread these comic books. These are actually some of the best, I think, He-Man comics ever made, in my opinion. There's great stuff in here that I thought was fantastic, and I love this issue. This origin, I think this to me feels a lot like what the new He-Man and Masters of the Universe show feels like. Very much this whole story about how He-Man and Skeletor is very much what I feel they use for their show. And I'm not sure if that's obviously Rob David, who is the guy who's running the show, it seems like. But these two origin comic books I thought were really well done, and especially, oh my God, the artwork in this comic. Have you read these comic books? I'm assuming you have.
I've seen them and I've browsed them, but I honestly have not. Because here's the thing. I will be reading them after we're off the show at this point. Because now that you're touting them up, I'm like, I do need to invest some time in these. But there was this feeling at that era of it where it's like, this is now going to be the DC version of what this is, and it might not mesh up to what any other version of it is. So there was that part of me going, well, I didn't like the whole thing with Adam being a woodsman. That was actually James Robinson that started that ball rolling. And for me, I know on one of the episodes I heard you were like, you liked him, and I'm like, yeah, that was one of the times where I'm just kind of scratching my head going, what happened? Because he was on it one issue, and then Giffen came on, or Giffen came on, and he just ran with the rest of it and made the best of it he could.
Yeah, James Robinson's a really good writer. Yeah, Robinson's a good writer. I don't know what happened with the He-Man thing, which is kind of a bummer because I'm not sure if you're watching Stargirl. He's like one of the head writers on Stargirl with Jeff Johns, and Stargirl is phenomenal. I think I just got caught up last week. There's a fight scene in a grocery store, which sounds stupid, but it is way more entertaining than it has any right to be, and it's the best CW superhero show ever. Go watch Stargirl. Stop wasting time. It's great. I love it. Anyway, these comics are great. Now the whole series is okay, but these origin comic books, chef's kiss. These are fantastic. Go read them. Now, before we wrap up, I want to talk about one of my favorite. This is my favorite He-Man comic ever, and this is the Keith Giffen Origin of Hordak comic book. And I remember buying this and being like, this looks amazing. Like, this looks incredible. I can't wait to read this. And I love Hordak. He's probably Skeletor. He's like neck and neck with Skeletor. I grew up on Skeletor. Sure. I freaking love Hordak. Is a phenomenal design. I think he's great. Now, when I reread this comic book a couple months ago, or actually last year now, and reread it again, I was blown away how much I love this comic book. And I'm curious, I said, dude, you need to read this comic book. If you haven't read this comic book, read it before we go on the show. We'll talk about it, and then we'll end on this right now.
Sure.
What's your take on this comic book? Because I love it. I love this comic.
I was actually really surprised by this one. And a lot of it is, this went to the levels I wanted Masters to go to at times, and it never, ever was let off the leash. And this book, and actually, I got to give a little shout out to Brian Keene, who co-wrote it with Keith Giffen. He's actually, he's about 40 minutes down the road from me. He's in York, Pennsylvania. He's a novelist from York who does horror novels and stuff, but he actually was working in comics as well. So the fact that there is a local guy who contributed to Masters on top of that made me go, that's awesome. But yeah, they turned Hordak into, I want to say they made him feel like Thanos before Thanos was in the movies. They made him feel like this unstoppable force. And no matter what anyone would do to confront him, he was eventually going to win no matter what. I am inevitable. It's that feeling reading this and going like, oh my God, this is like this. It's terrifying to imagine Hordak in this version. And that's the thing that gets me with growing up with the Filmation stuff. For a lot of people, they want Hordak to be snorting like a pig. and he's supposed to transform into a rocket and fly away. It's like, no, Hordak should be someone that the minute he shows up, it's like, this is Endgame. We're freaking done if we don't know how to take care of this guy. And this issue proves how terrifying that can be.
Well, and I think that also, like, they gave him some, like, a real, like Zodak's brother. Like, I mean, like, that's, or Zodiac, I'm sorry, Zodiac, right? Is that his
Zodak.
name? Zodak? Yeah, right.
Zodak.
Yeah, right. Zodak's brother, and, like, I'm assuming you know who Jack Kirby is, right? And,
yes.
Right, Keith Giffen, whatever his name is, dude, he just channels Kirby. Like this, look at Zodak here. He looks exactly like a Jack Kirby drawing, man. Like it's straight up just Jack Kirby. Just go, keep being like, I'm just gonna do Fourth World Jack Kirby, and it's incredible. I'll take it all day long. But I thought it was really good. I think this is one of the best, in my opinion, Masters of the Universe comics I've ever read. I think it's phenomenal. It's so good.
And what's funny is, for anybody who complained about Revelation, where in the first part He-Man wasn't there, versus then in the second part now He-Man's back, and it's like, well, it's called Masters of the Universe. You are able to tell some stories where he doesn't get involved, and you can show the extent of these characters. And this is a perfect example of a story where He-Man is not even in it at all, but you can really have a good time playing in the sandbox with those characters. And the other thing I wanted to say real quick too, since we brought up the Fourth World, is I heard years ago John Byrne actually say that the live action Masters of the Universe movie is the best Fourth World movie he ever saw. And he started like laying out here, Skeletor's Dark Side, He-Man's Orion, and he was going through the whole setup. And even there's a guy, Scott Knightlick, who he has a Spectre Creative channel, and he worked at Mattel.
I subscribed to it.
Well, yeah, he worked at Mattel, and he said that they were trying to do a Jack Kirby Fourth World line, and some of those ideas ended up being used in Masters. So there is a Kirby connection within Masters, even if you don't realize it. And from some of the designs, you can see, there is an influence that the designers probably had for some of the way. I mean, look at Manny faces. There's no way that isn't like at least somewhat Kirby-esque the way that he looks.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I think you like this version, but dude, the new animated series version, I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible. It's inspired, in my opinion. Like it's so different, but I love it.
No, I enjoy the freshness of those designs. They might not, like, He-Man might not be exactly what I want to see He-Man, but man, Skeletor, Trapjaw, Evil Lyn, Beastman, Manny Faces, it's like all that stuff's knocking it out of the park. So I just want to say that if you guys are, if you're looking to read some Masters comic books, in my opinion, I think the Origin DC books are really, really good. The main series, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite by any means, but I honestly would go probably the mini comics and the Origin DC comic books right now, just off the top of my head, to be honest. The mini comics have been way more fun. I mean, when you have Mark Teixeira drawing it, it's easy for me to be like, go read that. That's great. They're fun. They're fun.
They're a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm hoping that they do more comics, like for the animated series. I know they did some novels, but give me some comics, man. I want to do that, go down that road. But
Dark Horse is doing that, actually. They just recently they had a little promotion that they're doing. There's a subline right now in the toys that they have out for the Masterverse toys they're doing, and it's called New Eternia. So Dark Horse is actually taking over, and they're doing a New Eternia comic book where now it's going to be like, basically they've shown a few pages of it, and it has kind of like different art styles. So I don't know if it's an anthology or not. I'm questioning that, because in one, it's a Viking looking He-Man, which is a figure that's out right now. Another one is a Battle Armor He-Man that's an update figure that they have right now. And then another one, it's Sorceress and Zodak, and that style looks nothing like the Battle Armor, looks nothing like the Viking. And the best way I can describe it for anyone out there who's into comics is it feels almost like you're looking at a heavy metal magazine, and how the European style is in some of those artists that are published in there. So it will be an interesting one to pick up and see, because the other thing is it's a legit He-Man Masters book versus for DC, they were going through mini series of, okay, we're going to do Thundercats, then we're going to do Superman, and we're going to, like you were saying, the Injustice and of it. And it's like
too much.
Let's just have a legit, here's a He-Man book and just tell He-Man stories, and tell Masters stories.
Really quick, we're going to wrap up here. What have you read the Multiverse of Masters of the Multiverse comic?
I have, yes.
What's your take on it? Really quick. What's your take?
I did not enjoy it as much as some people because.
Thank you. You're a kindred spirits.
Yeah, I could tell. I could tell.
God, yes, thank you.
I didn't enjoy
terrible.
it. Tim Seeley, the writer, I actually got to interview him. I was in an interview with him on Council of the First Ones podcast, and he was talking about how he wrote it. And one of the things he said on the show, which had me like face palm, and granted, he does this for a living. I'm never going to say that I'm better than him or whatever. He is a professional. He does this, and that's awesome. But he was saying he basically wrote it where he was writing each issue as he went. So he didn't have like a through line of what was going on. So when you get to that final issue, when what happens, it comes out of nowhere and you're like, what the hell is going on? And there was a lot of people who thought that was completely insane. And I was one of them going, did I miss something? You go back and you check. No, you didn't miss something. This was never, ever even telecast or telegraphed from anywhere. There was no subplot about this. It just boom. And suddenly it's like, that's how you solve the story. And I'm like, I did not enjoy that at all. And
it was a good premise. It was a good idea in premise.
Agreed.
It wasn't executed the best. It wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Like people like would rave about it. I'm like, well, I'm excited to read this, and I'm like, okay, I guess.
Well, my big thing is I went in with my expectations versus what someone else would do, because the Anti-Eternia He-Man was a character from German radio plays, and so when I found out about Anti-Eternia He-Man, I found out about him in the classics line, the toys behind me, and I thought, oh my god, this like literally ebony He-Man, and they call him the most evil man in the universe. I'm like, that's chilling. That the whole premise of that to me is chilling. It's like, imagine Michael Myers just being able to have the power of Greyskull and going around and doing whatever he felt like. And then all of a sudden I'm reading this book and I'm thinking he should barely talk. He should just be this like constant impending
he's like
doom.
Talking a ton.
He's
right?
talking all over the place. He sounds like you and me right now. And I was like, no. He should say as little as possible. He should get in, get out, move on.
Javier Bardem, No Country for Old Men, right?
Yes, exactly. It should feel like the minute he showed up, you should feel uneasy, like Moreland, in the Spider-Man run and all. And instead, this guy was just like constantly talking, and he even was able to get defeated at one point, if I remember right. But then somehow they couldn't defeat him after. I'm like, what? And then it was so topsy-turvy with how the story went that I'm like, if people liked it, that's great, but I did not find it that good. No.
Yeah, I'm anticipating. I'm looking forward to Dark Horse taking over.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have a lot. They're taking over Ghostbusters comics soon, which I'm excited about. Yeah. So because Justin Reitman, it sounds like they're going to be a more cohesive universe now.
Okay.
Which I'm all about. I'm all about having the cohesion. That's just that's how I am. Whatever. But they're taking over He-Man now. I'm excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
The He-Man. I think the He-Man franchise is really prime. It's just prime stuff. It's a prime franchise. It's going to blow up even bigger. We talked about it before the show, and I do think that this show is not going to be the same as Star Wars, but it's going to be a similar vehicle for it, in my opinion. Because this show is really impressive. If you guys haven't watched the show, go watch this show. I love it. I stand by it. It is, to me, it's great. So go watch it. please, because it deserves more recognition, in my opinion. People don't watch it enough, and when I see people dog on it, I'm like, you guys don't get it. I don't know. I don't get it.
The people that say it's He-Man in name only, I feel like they haven't even watched a single episode, because when you watch it, it's like, no, all you have to do is change the costumes and you have a legit, this is He-Man CGI, basically, and so anybody who dogs on it, like you're saying, it's like, and granted, it might not be for people, and that's fine. It might not, you just might be so pure about how you want it. That's fine. You do you. But if you want to experience something that tells a new story in a different way, but it still feels like you're a kid watching it, this is the perfect venue right there.
Like hate on like He-Man and Skeletor dating, I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was done really well and creatively, to be honest.
Agreed.
And, you brought up on your show that Skeletor might be the best Skeletor ever.
Oh yeah,
I think you said it, and I was 1,000%. Like, it sucks because I love Mark Hamill, and you think like, oh, Mark Hamill, Joker, he was solid. But dude, this Skeletor is, I think this guy is the best version of the Skeletors ever. He's fantastic.
He is a man that manages to accomplish more in 3 seasons than Filmation and other versions combined. I mean, the guy, even the Mark Hamill version only got so far in Revelation.
Yeah.
But this one, he managed to do some stuff where I'm like, by the end of season 3, which, yes, we need to put that episode out. I will get on that about that in the morning.
Please,
no problem. But at the end of season 3, you're watching the heroes going, how are you getting out of this one? And it's Skeletor. He's got him against the wall, and I loved it. That is how I've always wanted to see him. I wanted him to be someone that is a force to be reckoned with. And this show did it.
Well, Sean, we did it. We got here, and I told you we have a problem. I mean, we're 2 of us. No problems.
No problem.
So no problems at all. So thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy day. I'm a family man like yourself. We're busy. You're late over there. I feel super bad. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It seriously means a lot to me, honestly. Thank you.
I am always happy to talk about this, and it was a huge pleasure. And I'm glad, on top of that, you reaching out to us. I feel like I gained a friend now, because we've been talking back and forth, and I'm just like, this is great. And I've been so lax on my comics that it's like, you're reminding me, hey, don't forget this side of your geekdom either. You love the other stuff, that's fine, but the comics are still out there. So I was like, where's that turn going to be for me? Well, there it is, right there.
There it is.
You are the man. So there you go.
That's good. And here's the thing, though, man. It's comics, the medium itself. It doesn't matter what comics you're consuming, whether it be mainstream, independent. Like, my wife does not like superhero comics at all, and she reads, super weird, independent, artsy fartsy stuff, and that's fine. Like, I just love the medium, and I want to promote the medium, and I want to get people back into it. And obviously the science fiction, the fantasy, that stuff dominates comic books, and that's cool. And I'm all about it. But I just want to promote the medium, and if it helps get you back into comic books, let's do it, and we'll get you on. Because you love Birthright so much, you're gonna get on. We're gonna get you on Birthright.
I'm more than happy.
We gotta get you on that, man. So tell people where they can find you and your podcast, your awesome podcast.
All right, you can find us on YouTube, actually, Legends of Greyskull Podcast on YouTube. If you're on Facebook, we have also a group, Legends of Greyskull Podcast, on there. You can join the group and talk shop with us. We also throw our questions, comments, and geekdom out there when we're about to record. So if you want to join in and have us answer anything on the show, feel free. And you can also email us, logpod85@gmail.com, with anything as well, and we will respond on the show in kind. And I think that's and you can find the podcast on pretty much Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, all the podcast apps. So we are out there, and just 2 guys wanting to kick back and talk about Masters of the Universe for a long time.
And you know what? I think the best way is to go and subscribe specifically on YouTube. So get on there and like their videos.
Sure.
Go check them out. I'm telling you, people, if you want good discussion, genuine discussion, they don't love everything, which is good. I mean, you can trust their opinions when they love something. They love it. It's not just them hating or loving. They're not shills. They're not haters. They're genuine fans who love the material. And that's why I love the show. So go check out the show, please. They deserve it. They're great guys. Follow the Comic Binge on Twitter. Go hit like, subscribe, all that crap, whatever. Do that stuff. Yeah,
all of it.
all of it. Right? Yeah, do it. Ring the bell. All that crap. Instagram. Check us out. Subscribers, thank you very much. And Chris isn't here, so I'll take us out. So read more. Good night, everybody.